All right, it is 9 o'clock. If everyone could conclude their conversations rapidly, I'd appreciate that, so we can start the hearings. Thank you very much. Today is Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. It is 9 a.m. We are here in council chambers for the hearing examiner hearings, which I am now calling to order. Before we start the hearings, I want to advise everyone here regarding the Cape Coral process, which is a little bit different than what is followed in other jurisdictions. In our process, the clerk will read the introduction of the case. The clerk will then swear in anyone who is testifying, and then city staff testifies regarding compliance with public notice. Assuming public notice is found to have properly occurred, the applicant will go first and present an entire case. City staff goes second and presents an entire case. Public comment is next. If you're here for public comment, please make sure that your comments are comprehensive, because once public comment is closed, it will not be reopened. Following the closure of public comment, the applicant will respond to questions and make any final comments. Staff will do the same, and the hearing is concluded at that time. If you have a cell phone with you, please silence it or turn it off, and take any cell phone conversations outside the room. If you wish to have private conversations, please move away from the speaker's lectern so we do not accidentally record your conversation. If your conversation is accidentally recorded, it becomes part of the public record at that time. Please come to the microphone if you have comments so we can properly record your testimony. All testimony must be under oath, and members of the public we no longer have a podium at the side, so we won't do that anymore. We used to have a podium at the side for the public to provide comments, and I see we don't have that today. So if you do have comments today and you're here for public comment, there's actually a podium up there. To my left, probably your right, and if you're here for public comment, please utilize that. It has the same video and audio capability as the other podium. Anyone who provides testimony other than the applicant and staff is requested to fill out a public participation card so we can properly spell your name. If you do wish a copy of the hearing examiner order or recommendation, please provide your email contact information. However, once provided, it is then a part of the public record and available to the public. With those preliminary comments, I'm going to start the hearings. I've received a request to have case number B, which is the variance case, moved to the top of the list. And so, Madam Clerk, if you will call case B, we will have staff testify regarding public notice, and then we will proceed from there. Thank you.
Case number VAR 22-000035, address 302 Southwest 29th Street. Applicant Cape Coral Holding HD LLC, care of Amy Thibault. The applicant has requested a variance to the front yard setback dimensional requirement for a single-family residential property zoned R1. The variance seeks a relief of 6.7 feet, which would reduce the front yard setback from the required 25 foot to 18.3 feet. The applicant has stated the variance is necessary as the home was constructed within the front yard setback due to a surveyor error, and they cannot obtain a certificate of occupancy otherwise. The change would be for a single parcel measuring approximately 12,369 square feet or 0.28 acres, and would not affect the setback requirements, zoning, or future land use of the surrounding properties. The City Planning Division has recommended denial of the variance as it was deemed that the applicant failed to meet all 7 of the criteria for approval listed in the LDC section 3.4.3.b, specifically criteria 1 and criteria 4. Any persons giving testimony today, if you are able, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Good morning.
Morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. Anthony Santor, Associate Planner for City Planning Division. This case was noticed. There was a sign posted on the property. There was an advertisement placed in the paper of record, and a mailing was distributed to the property owners within a 500-foot boundary of the subject property.
Thank you. I will find the public, that the proper public notice was given. I also want to put on the record that I did a site visit. Can we have the applicant's representative up, please? Thank you. That's fine, thank you. Either one's fine.
Okay. Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. For the record, Amy Sayers and Tebow with Pavese Law Firm. I am the applicant on behalf of the property owner. Unfortunately, we're coming to you today to request a continuance. The property owner, who is also our expert witness, was rushed to the hospital at 4:30 this morning for breathing issues.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so we very much did not want to continue this or push it any farther than we had to, but right now we do feel that the circumstances necessitated continuance, and we respectfully would request your approval of that.
That's not a problem. You get one continuance as of right in any event, but given the medical nature of the problem, how long of a period do you think you'd need?
Well, ideally, I would like to come to the next hearing. I believe that's March 7th. I do believe I could find another expert if needed. Unfortunately, I am unavailable on the 21st, but I do think I could find another expert that could come to testify to some of these structural issues that we're dealing with.
And the surveyor as well?
Excuse
And
me?
the surveyor as well?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, that's fine. Well, let me ask, Madam Clerk, what is our next availability?
The next hearing date is Tuesday, March 7th, 2023.
Thank you. And let me ask staff what their availability is. All right, is March 7th okay with you?
Madam Hearing Examiner, City Planning has no objections. The only issue would be we do have to renotice to a date certain, so it may be tight for the mailings and the ads in the paper, but we can try to get that in there as soon as possible.
Well, I'm familiar with the case you're talking about, and our Assistant City Attorney wants to weigh in. Could you?
Your Honor, there's a recent case, John Niclario, City Attorney's Office, there's a recent case where dates to, and it's not clear what subject matters it applies to, but continuances, date certain, have to be re-advertised. So we still have to meet all the deadlines. So what is the deadline for meeting March 7th? When would we have to get the ad in the paper?
Sorry, what is it, 10 days?
You probably want to go up to the
10 days
microphone.
prior
You
to the-
you probably want to go up to the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Our Assistant City Attorney has a microphone right where he's sitting, so.
Sorry.
Could staff meet the deadline to properly advertise? Because otherwise we'll get here March 7th and we're going to
Can't
have to
do
say
it.
no proper ad and we go back home again.
It-
So we'll,
It's 10 days prior to the hearing, so we should be able to do that. That's March 7th.
February 25th.
Yeah, so we can do that. That's a couple days. We'll have to initiate it immediately as soon as we return back to the office, but it should be something that we can
We
do.
don't know how much the process is backlogged, because it's not just planning, right? It's also the clerk. I'm okay.
but as long as the applicant understands if for some reason they do not meet the ad requirements,
It'll
it's
have to
going
be
to
the
be the
21st,
next
and
meeting of
someone
March.
else from my
Well,
office will
or
cover.
we can do it in April, I mean.
So, and the flip side of this is, we're dealing with some issues as far as the, construction loan, and the house is uninsurable. So we do want to get this done as quickly as possible.
I'm okay with March 7th, it's just with the
Yes,
understanding that it may not happen.
And we'd be fine with March 21st as a last resort. Someone from my office could cover it, Neil Montgomery or Steve Hartzell or someone like that.
We're going to shoot for March 7th, right?
All right. That's fine. So March 7th is acceptable, recognizing that it's a very tight deadline and may not happen, so no harm, no foul on anybody's part. All right. I guess we still do announce a continuance date, even though it's a renotice, right?
While we're picking date certain anymore, when we're going to re-advertise it, sure.
Thank you for humoring me. All right, so the continuance date will be March 7th, 2023, here in council chambers with the hearing starting at 9 a.m., with the understanding that it needs to be formally renoticed with all the formality of the original notice, so.
Thank you
for
very
coming
much.
in. Sure, okay, and our best wishes to the person who went to the hospital. Thank you. All right, Madam Clerk, moving on to the second hearing, please, thank you.
There we go. sorry, problem with the microphone. Case PDP 22-000002, address 1025-1031 Santa Barbara Boulevard. Applicant Lomangino Enterprises Incorporated, care of Cheryl Maymon. The owner of a 2.72 acre site located at 1025/1031 Santa Barbara Boulevard, Lomangino Enterprises Incorporated requested approval of a PDP amendment. In particular, the owner requests to amend a condition of approval that previously required a 15-foot wide landscape buffer with a wall along the south property line of lots 12 to 15 in block 1027. This modified buffer will allow a 7-foot wide strip of riprap to be placed along the edge of the Nicholas Canal to stabilize the shoreline. The landscaping that will include sable palms and grasses will be planted on the south side of an existing 6-foot tall wall in this buffer. The wall will block headlights of vehicles entering and leaving a parking lot behind the wall. Recommended plantings will provide buffering and will be better suited for the slopes associated with this buffer area. This amendment will provide the health, safety, and welfare of the public by allowing the canal bank to be stabilized and improvements in the buffer to be completed. This project will not result in any new demand on city services, as this project does not approve any additional increase in commercial area beyond that previously approved by Ordinance 8-06. Any persons giving testimony today, if you are able, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Struve.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. Mike Struve, Planning Team Coordinator with the Planning Division. This case was advertised, and that included placing an ad in the news press 10 days in advance of this hearing date, mailing to all surrounding property owners within 500 feet of the site, and then posting a sign on the subject property.
I will find the proper notice was given. I also want to put on the record that I did perform a site visit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe the applicant's rep up, please.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. My name is Dan Johnson. I'm Project Manager with Mastrick Engineering, representing the applicant in this particular case, Lomangino Enterprises, Inc. This application is for a PDP amendment, and I'm not going to go through a whole lot of detail because it looks like that staff report has quite a bit of detail in it on the history of the project. Suffice it to say, this property, which is located at the intersection of Santa Barbara Boulevard and Nicholas Parkway, southeast quadrant, and applicant's holdings are 2.72 acres on this parcel. Originally, this parcel was approved for a PDP back in 1998, subsequently amended in 2006 to include the 2 buildings that are on the site now that the applicant currently owns. Those buildings have changed uses over the years, and the parking requirements became deficient. So in 2018, another PDP amendment was applied for and approved to allow for an expansion for the parking on some subsequent lots 12 through 15, block 1027. The project was subsequently submitted and permitted for a site development plan permit, which was obtained in 2019. In 2019, I think it was probably 2020 when construction started. Construction started on the parking improvements and probably 90% complete. And we encountered a difficulty with the area between the landscape wall, which is referred to in her synopsis there. The sloping between the landscape wall and the canal bank became a little bit of an issue. So when we go back to what was originally approved under the SDP, there is essentially the buffer consists of a wall, 6-foot wall, a 15-foot landscape area, and a seawall. Now a seawall, by the engineering design standards, has 3 options. One of them being just a straight 4-to-1 slope with the 6-foot wall. the other one being a 2-to-1 riprap slope for bank protection, and then a 3 to 4 to 1 above that, and the other one is just a full-fledged standard concrete panels cap seawall with tiebacks. Obviously, given the circumstances with it being pretty much constructed, trying to put in the tiebacks on a seawall at this point is a bit of a construction problem. So we opted to go with the alternative seawall with a 2-to-1 riprap slope. All of those things being consistent with standard code requirements, whatever. However, one of the provisions of the ordinance Ordinance 5818, I believe it is, one of the conditions of that ordinance was the landscape buffer between the canal and the parking lot needed to be a 15-foot wall, 15-foot landscape area, and under that particular code from prior to 2019, that particular code doesn't allow for anything to be encroaching within that 15-foot setback area or buffer area. Well, if we put in the 2-to-1 riprap slope for slope protection and seawall, it leaves you a lesser distance than the 15 feet. Hence, we are here asking for a variance to try to come up with a alternative landscape scheme that will be effective, appealing, and also allow for us to achieve our slope protection and keep the facility as it is, because obviously parking is a premium and we really don't want to rip out any parking and reduce parking spaces, because that was the objective to begin with. So that is why we're here today. What we're doing is we've worked with city staff to try to put together the landscape parameters of what would be an appropriate landscaping in there. Obviously, we can just cram a bunch of trees in there under this typical canopy, 5 per 100 and 3 accent trees and 66 shrubs, whatever, per 100 feet. But that doesn't necessarily give you the best product. So working with staff, they came up with some suggestions about, well, let's just do clusters of palm trees and use seagrasses or grasses instead of just the same old standard shrubs, because they have a lot better chance of looking good, number one. Their root structures aren't going to be destructive as canopy trees would over time, and hence the reason we're here requesting the amendment to this PDP to allow for this alternative landscape area.
I looked at the canal. I think the short version of my comments would be, it's a real mess.
Oh, well, that's what we saw.
Yeah.
And at the time, what we ended up, we saw the situation, we said, something's wrong here, so we went on and had a whole lot of detailed survey work done on there. So what can we fit and what we can't fit, and that's kind of what's represented now in the plans, and that's why the landscaping is being revised to accommodate that in the plans. And yeah, it'd be nice to get that all cleaned up and put this behind us from our perspective.
But the wall prevents any runoff from the parking lot, right?
Parking lot is all drained back to a collection system for water treatment prior to discharge.
Got
So
it.
we
And-
couldn't discharge off of there anyway.
And that would be on the street side, right? It wouldn't
It'd be
on
towards the street,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
parking lot would drain towards catch basins, and there's a retention area on the site, and
yeah.
yeah, it all gets collected and discharged.
Well, I think anytime you have a canal a canal terminus, you're going to have some type of a issue with water quality and debris and other stuff. But boy, that canal's a real mess, that terminus. So hopefully something will happen that,
Well, it'd be nice at least to clean up the bank. As far as the circulation in the canal, I really can't do anything about that at the moment.
I get that part. But I was also looking at the other side, where it appears to be a water retention basin. That's not involved with this PDP, I assume.
No,
But,
it
yeah,
isn't.
But I think that's part of the issue, but that's way past the parameters.
Well, no, we do have a water retention area on the site
Okay.
as a part of that plan. All projects do,
No, I
that
understand
are not single-family residential individual lots. I mean, they're all required to do something to improve the water quality.
Sure, I
I
understand.
mean, we're not here to be destructive about anything.
No, I get what you're saying. No, I was thinking a little bit beyond our discussion today about the entire situation with that canal. But you're right, it's not really an issue for today, so.
Well, you know, I can design a pumping system, and it'll pump water from on a canal into that one and let it flush down and clean it out.
Yeah, good luck with the owner on that one, but
It won't be cheap, though.
that would be a great solution. But and there's, of course, a lot of debris, which is a whole nother issue. But thank you for your presentation. I have no questions. Thank you. All right, Mr. Struve?
Good morning again, Madam Hearing Examiner. For the record, Mike Struve, Planning Team Coordinator with the Planning Division. And I would like to request for the purposes of this hearing that I be recognized as an expert in the area of land use planning based on my credentials on file with the City Clerk's Office and my past testimony before you previously on similar matters.
I will find you as an expert regarding issues related to this PDP hearing based upon your credentials, which are on file with the clerk, and based upon your testimony and prior hearings regarding issues that are similar to that today. Thank you.
Thank you. So this project involves a PDP amendment. Again, the owner is Lomangino Enterprises Incorporated, represented by Maastricht Engineering. You've already heard from Mr. Johnson, and then more recently received a letter of authorization for Cheryl Maimon to also represent the property owner. The owner is seeking to modify or amend an existing landscaping provision found in Ordinance 5818 that pertains to a landscape buffer requirement. These sites are located at 1021 and 1025 through 1031 Santa Barbara Boulevard. The PDP amendment itself really pertains to the latter of these two properties, which is addressed as 1025 to 1031 Santa Barbara Boulevard, and the area of the site is 2.7 acres. This is an aerial map showing the property we'll be discussing today in a yellow crosshatch pattern. The site has two multi-tenant commercial buildings on it. The parking lot that Mr. Johnson alluded to is on the eastern part of the property, north of the Nicholas Canal, and has frontage along Nicholas Parkway. Looking out more broadly at the surrounding land uses, we have residential development mainly to the north and to the east and south, with commercial development largely to the west of the subject site. And the subject property has a commercial professional future land use classification and C zoning. And all surrounding properties, immediately surrounding properties, have either C zoning or single-family residential zoning indicated in the yellow on this slide. A little bit of background on this case. This project was originally approved in 1998. It was entitled the Hess Service Station, and this authorized approval of the gas station and the convenience store that currently exists at the intersection of Nicholas Parkway and Santa Barbara Boulevard. In 2006, this project was amended and renamed the Santa Barbara Plaza East project. This PDP expanded the project area and also authorized the approval of the two multi-tenant commercial buildings that are located on the site. And then in 2018, most recently, the project was again expanded to include lots 12 through 15 in block 1027. And these lots collectively represent the site where the new parking lot has been constructed and where the wall is located, and again is subject to this particular PDP amendment. One thing that's important, I think, to remember that when this project was last amended, that was when the city was administering the land use and development regulations that have subsequently been replaced by the Land Development Code. So this particular site, this particular project is still governed by those provisions in the land use and development regulations. The request before you, the owner requests to amend a landscaping condition that appears under the general considerations section of Ordinance 58-18, which states the following: landscape buffer planting shall be installed along the entire length of the southern property line of lots 12 through 15 in block 1027. These plantings shall comply with all landscape requirements for a landscape buffer C as specified in LUDR section 5.2. So this particular provision allowed the developer some flexibility in installing this buffer because our code allowed for a couple of different options. And right now, before I forget, I want to point out that option number 1, that actually should read a 25-foot landscape buffer. So one of the options was to allow a landscape buffer with a minimum width of 25 feet without a wall. In our staff report, we did identify the 25 feet. We didn't, unfortunately, in this slide. The other option allowed for a landscape buffer as narrow as 15 feet, but required a wall in that case if you weren't providing a buffer area with a width of at least 25 feet. For this particular project, the developer decided to provide a 25-foot wide buffer along the east property line, because they were required to provide a buffer there too, based on the adjacent zoning. And they decided to provide a 15-foot landscape buffer along the Nicholas Canal. And their plans showed that when they went to hearing back in 2018. The Land Development Code also contains a requirement, and this was something that was carried over, the Land Use and Development Regulations contained a requirement that specified what types of improvements are allowed in a buffer area. And this particular provision also appears, for the most part, in our Land Development Code currently. And it states, regardless of the buffer option selected, required buffer yards are prohibited from most types of development activities. And explicitly, it says, other than drainage facilities, sidewalks, plants, walls, or berms. The code also allows for the placement of driveways if the driveways are leading out to a street to provide access. Other than that, all other development activities are prohibited. And so where the problem or the challenge came into play in this particular project was the slopes were sufficiently steep where it was not possible to install a seawall in this case along the canal because they exceeded the 4-to-1 slope, which is established in our engineering and design standards manual. Fortunately, in this case, because it's a freshwater canal, unlike saltwater canals, the applicant has a couple of different options. And so they could go with an alternative process that involves riprap. And riprap, just so we're all clear on what that terminology is, riprap are rocks or stones of various sizes that are used, generally placed along the margin of a water body. In this application, we're talking about a canal, but they're also used along lakes. They help stabilize the shoreline, prevent erosion, and they help break up the energy associated with wave action as the water rocks sort of back and forth along a water body. The problem with the riprap in this case is that it was going to occupy the bottom roughly 7 feet of the landscaped area. And that's where the conflict is because that area is required essentially to be landscaped or green area. These are a couple of photos. The first one on the left is showing the wall as it exists on the property today. So we're looking southward with the canal behind the wall. And then on the right-hand side of this screen, we're looking towards the west, towards the 1025 restaurant, looking at the buffer area. And I think you described the buffer area earlier as messy. And I think this gives you an indication of the accuracy of that statement. There's a lot of, not a lot, but there are exotics in this area that will need to be cleaned out. There are some landscaping that was previously installed in here that is either dead or is doing poorly. So that landscaping will need to be replaced. And what this photo does not really do justice to, in looking at it here two-dimensionally, is to give you an idea of how steep this area is. If you've been out there and looked at the site, you can see that it's, after you get off that first 5 or 6 foot shelf, it falls down pretty steep and pretty quickly. if you will. So we have analyzed this request to begin with based on those standards that appear in the Land Development Code. These are for standards for amending a PDP for applications that do not involve 100% of the PDP land area. Involves one of the two properties in this case. The first standard is the property that is controlled by the existing PDP consists of more than one parcel or tract of land. In this case, the PDP consists of two parcels that are owned by different entities. The site that is subject to the requested amendment at 1025 to 1031 Santa Barbara Boulevard is owned by Lomangino Enterprises Incorporated. The site is 2.7 acres, and so this criterion is met. The second standard is the party or parties making application for the amendment of the existing PDP holds title to ownership of 100% of the property that would be included in the proposed amendment. So that's what we're focusing on here. The second really doesn't apply, but the second part of this standard would allow a third party with written consent of all the owners, if the property was not owned by a single entity, to file an application on their behalf. And sometimes we see this, particularly if there's an attorney involved. In this case, the owner filing the application, Lomangino Enterprises Incorporated, owns 100% of the subject property to which this PDP amendment has been applied for, and so this criterion has also been met. And then thirdly, the proposed amendment would not negatively affect the lawful existence of the existing PDP as it relates to the property that is controlled by the PDP development plan, and that would not be included in the proposed amendment. So in essence, will this amendment harm the other property, the service station property to the west of the site? And in essence, we find that that will not be the case. Each of these properties really sort of stand on their own. They operate independent of one another. Each property has its own access, its own stormwater management, its own parking area. One property does not rely on any of the other properties for any type of service. So we find that this standard has also been met. Now I want to talk very briefly about the features of the revised buffer area, what staff is recommending. And the applicant actually approached us at one time and had showed us a landscape plan with that, at least in terms of the required plantings for a landscape C plan, would have met code. All right.
Clerk to the rescue. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt your presentation.
No, not
Mr.
at all.
Strube. Thank you. That's perfect. Thank you. Okay. Keep going. I think you were talking about, where I lost you was the Sable Palms, if you would go back to that.
Sure. So originally, the applicant had proposed a planning schedule that was really consistent with the buffer C requirement, at least as it relates to the number of canopy trees and accent trees and shrubs. And staff reviewed that, and we recommended some pretty significant changes to that because we just did not think, we thought basically that would crowd that landscaping into too tight of an area, and as Mr. Johnson alluded to as well, we were concerned that over time the roots of those canopy trees as they expanded might threaten the physical integrity of the wall itself. So we recommended a different planting schedule. We believe that the applicants support that. So the buffer now is going to consist of a wall, which is existing. It's then going to consist of 7 roughly linear feet of plantings with mulch, which will include a series of landscaped islands featuring sable palms, and then in between those islands there will be grasses. And then there will be roughly a linear foot of sod or so, and then that will transition to the 7 linear feet of riprap or stone that will be located closest to the canal to provide for bank stabilization. And this is a landscape plan, which is part of the exhibits associated with this case. And where I think this is most clear is if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen that shows a profile, which shows the wall on the left, farthest from the water, the groupings of the sable palms with the grasses around them. Then there's a foot of sod, which isn't real apparent here, but if you were to magnify this, you would see it. And then the last 7 feet again showing the stone or the riprap. We've analyzed this change to the landscaping, and we include more details in our staff report, but in general, we think this will be a very viable solution. The wall will provide good screening from residents that live to the south of the site. The wall, I think most importantly, will do a good job of screening headlights during the nighttime hours that would otherwise potentially intrude into those properties to the south of the site if that wall was not there. The wall may provide some limited sound attenuation, although that will not be the primary function of the wall in this case. The palms will be a better choice than the canopy trees given the limited planting area and given that their roots will not be as aggressive as the roots of the canopy trees likely would be. The grasses, we believe, will also be a better option than the shrubs given the slopes that are present now in the buffer area, and we also believe that the grasses will provide for better ground cover and therefore over time will do a better job of preventing erosion. And we believe that this combination of palm trees and grasses will be effective not only in promoting the survivability of these plants, but will also be of high aesthetic value too, at least be of interest for people that are looking at the project from the south side of the canal.
Before we get into that, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Certainly.
Can we go back to the last slide? I recognize that the majority of these proposals are xeriscape, but I would assume they will need to be sprinkled, at least initially, to get them firmly rooted into what they.
So they will need to be, they'll need to be irrigation run to them, just like we would require on other sites where irrigation is a service that the city provides. And one thing I didn't mention here, but even before the planning begins, there'll be a good bit of work that'll need to be done in terms of removing some exotics that exist in this area and then cleaning up some of the brush, if you will, that you saw existing previously in that area.
Right, but that was a prelude to my question, which was, I was a little surprised at the sod, given the fact that it appears that the rest of these are xeriscape plantings. Not an expert in landscaping, but my time at the Cape has certainly educated me a great deal. So was there a contemplation of something besides sod? And probably what I'm about to say is not appropriate, but something like beach daisies that would be ground cover. I think beach daisies are probably salt. I don't know, given the fact that they're beach. But was there any discussion or contemplation of something besides sod that would be a ground cover? I understand the transition.
Yeah.
Has there been any discussion regarding that?
Really hadn't. I think we did consult pretty heavily with our city horticulturists on this. The sod area is going to be pretty narrow, roughly about a foot or so. Most of this area will be mulched. So
Was the thought that the sod would have more ability to retain the soil coming into the riprap section than a other type of ground cover would?
I think that is generally true. I think one of the benefits of sod is that it does hold moisture a little bit better than a grassed surface cover would. In terms of other benefits, sod would probably be just as good or maybe even superior to mulch in terms of reducing erosion. But we thought that the sod would work best in combination with the palms that were being recommended.
And the grasses, I understand.
Yes,
what you're saying.
and with the grasses too,
All
certainly.
right, thank you.
We did analyze this PDP amendment for consistency with the city comprehensive plan, and there were several policies that were pertinent here that are found in the future land use element. Policy 1.15, Table 1, that shows the consistency between the C zoning of the site and the commercial professional future land use classification. Policy 1.15C, which pertains to the commercial professional future land use classification, and then discusses the C zoning district. And this particular provision provides a FAR cap for development with the C zoning district, and then it also outlines or provides guidelines of where the C zoning district is appropriate in relation to the depth of a site, as well as to generally recommending the location of Z zoning along streets, major city streets. So this particular project has an FAR of well under 1, doesn't come close to exceeding the 1.0 cap. The site has what we consider full block depth, or depth of at least 250 feet for part of the project, not for the entire project. And it does have frontage along Nicholas Parkway, which is considered a major city street. There are two policies that are very similar, so we've grouped them together, policies 1.17 and 8.2, which both essentially say that the city's land development regulations will require the buffering of incompatible land uses. So here we have a developing or redeveloping C zone site with residential zoning adjacent to it. And the buffer wall will continue to screen the parking lot from those residential sites to the south. The landscaping planted on the canal side of the wall will provide buffering, should create visual interest, and should also help to soften the appearance of the wall from the south side of the project. And then lastly, policy 8.3. It's a fairly long policy, and we've paraphrased it here, and it states that commercial development shall be designed to minimize negative impacts on surrounding residential development. And in this case, the completion of the project to include, that will include the completion of the buffer area, will help screen the project from residential uses to the south. The buffering, again, will help to provide softening of the site and, again, provide for visual interest. So we believe that this amendment is consistent with that policy as well. Staff is recommending approval of this amendment with several conditions that I'll review with you in a second. We have received one phone call. The individual who made the phone call is here today. I think he's prepared to testify. We did interpret his comments to us over the phone that he supports the project with staff conditions, but he can speak for himself, of course, too. And these are the conditions of approval that staff is recommending for this amendment. Number 1, all provisions and conditions contained in the Hess Service Station PDP as approved by Ordinance 93-98 and amended by Ordinances 8-06 and 58-18 for a project renamed to Santa Barbara Plaza East shall remain in full force and effect except as otherwise stated in this development order. The failure to repeat a provision or condition shall not be interpreted as an intention to delete or alter such provision or condition. 2, in lieu of providing a landscape buffer, see as required in Section 3, D4 of Ordinance 5818, the developer may elect to provide landscaping along the north side of the Nicholas Canal on lots 12 through 15 in Block 1027, as described in greater detail herein, in subsection A through F, and as depicted on sheets 5 of 7 and 7 of 7, entitled Site Paving, Drainage, Grading, and Cross-Section Plan, and a Landscape Plan, respectively, prepared by Maastricht Engineering, dated April 1st, 2019, and bearing a revision date of January 26th, 2023, and appearing in Composite Exhibit A. I do want to point out here, too, that if the developer decides that they want to completely comply with one of the landscape buffer Cs, as indicated in our staff report and as originally required, they can do that. It would likely require them at a minimum to remove the wall and do some pretty significant resloping of that bank. But what this does, it does allow them the option of an alternative buffer, again, as recommended by staff and subject to these conditions herein. Two A states, landscape planting shall be installed along the southern property line of lots 12 through 15 in Block 1027. These plantings shall consist of sable palms and ornamental grasses. 2B, sable palms shall be installed between the existing buffer wall and the Nicholas Canal. The palms shall be planted in 5 landscape islands in groups of a minimum of 3 palms per island. So it'd be a minimum of 15 palms in the buffer area. The landscaped island shall be unequally spaced apart, with the distance between adjacent islands ranging from 10 to 40 feet. Within each island, palms shall have a staggered height with a minimum average height of not less than 16 feet at the time of planting. The developer is encouraged to retain existing frond boots on all installed palms. 2C, ornamental grasses shall be installed between the palm landscaped islands and the buffer wall. Grasses shall have a minimum container size of 7 gallons and shall be installed 3 feet on center. Acceptable grasses include lemon, muley, spartina, and zebra grass. The Development Services Director may approve additional grass species not mentioned herein, provided the proposed grass species has growth characteristics that make the grass suitable for the landscape area.
I'm surprised that Fakahatchee grass isn't on that list. It seems to be pretty hardy.
It was something that we had actually discussed with our horticulturist, and I can't remember the reason why, but he had recommended that we remove that. He didn't feel that it was as well suited as some of the other grasses that are named here.
Well, these are more colorful, I would assume. I mean, muley for sure.
Right, right.
Maybe that was why, I don't know. Thank you.
2D states, all palm landscape islands and grasses shall be fully irrigated and have a 2-inch layer of organic mulch. 2E, all landscaping shall be maintained in good condition throughout the life of the project. Dead or missing landscaping shall be replaced by the developer at developer's expense. And then 2F, the site shall be maintained free of invasive exotic plant species in perpetuity, including all Category 1 and Category 2 species as listed by the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council.
Would you interpret subparagraph D as including the sod? 'Cause I don't
Yes, I would. The entire area, any green area, yes, would need to be fully irrigated.
Maybe I'll clarify that in the
Okay.
recommended conditions. Anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So yes, in short, to answer your question.
I assume so, but let me clarify that. Okay, keep going, thank you.
And that's all I have in case you have questions for me.
It's, even though this is a proposed landscape buffer only, I understand, this is still going to council, is that correct?
Yes, it will.
Okay, I thought so, but We haven't dealt with the PDPs recently, so I
Right,
haven't clarified
still a
that.
little bit of a new tool.
Okay, thank you very much. I have no other questions, all right? I'm sorry, we haven't dealt with the, PDPs. This is a public hearing. Do we have any requests to speak, Madam Clerk? Written ones? No written ones? Is there, all right, sir, come on up. Thank you. And if you'll identify yourself, please, when you come up.
Good morning, madam. My name is Jan Kentner, Jankentner. My wife and I own a property at Southeast 11th Terrace, which is not on the canal, but across from the wall, if you will. We've lived there owned it since 2010. And a couple comments. We appreciate the wall, otherwise we'd have headlights because both properties are not developed across from the wall. So we do appreciate the wall. I echo your comments about being very messy. We've looked at that now for a couple years. So there were plants delivered. They laid back there, died, those kind of things. Containers rolled in the canal. So those are some of the concerns we have. I don't have any objections to the riprap. I think that's a doable if that meets code. But I am concerned about the maintenance of the property because whatever's they put out front, there's several trees that died there already. The irrigation's broke. I walked over there yesterday. There was irrigation, always ran on the other part of the property. It doesn't work now or turned off. So I guess I'm looking at the long term of conditions approval would be 2F. What kind of, I think it was 2F, what is the maintained part of this? So that would be my main concern.
I think you're referencing 2E, which says the maintenance, landscaping shall be maintained in good condition.
Yeah,
2F is talking about exotics.
yeah, and also, exotic plants. So the maintenance of it is probably my main concern, especially if you look out what trees they put out by Nicholas. Some of those are dead already. So I guess that's where my comments would be.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming in today and taking time out of your schedule to appear today.
Yep.
The comments of the public are very, very important. I will ask staff and/or the applicant's rep to address that maintenance question in a minute, but was there anything else that you wanted to say?
Just lastly, I'm not the gentleman that called, so.
I also noticed that there's a terrible smell at the end of that canal, but I think that's outside the boundaries of what we can talk about today.
I agree. I've got some pictures. There's other things outside the boundaries there that could be discussed, but want to keep it to the topic.
A lot of turtles. I thought that was interesting.
Right.
Anyway,
Thank you for
very
your
much.
time.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else here who'd like to present testimony? Seeing none, I'll close. Yes, sir, come on up.
Would you like me to reply as the project manager or representative of the owner?
Well, you're certainly welcome to come up and testify to anything you want, sir. Come on up. And if you could state your name for the record. Were you sworn in?
Bruce Johnson, I'm the
Mr.
project manager on the project.
Were you sworn in?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead, sir. Thank you.
I just wanted to reply to your concerns over there. One of the reasons that the maintenance has been let go is that we've been in a state of limbo with the project for quite some time now, not knowing what was going to be required of us in order to complete the project. We were unsure. None of the plants that were sitting behind the wall that all died could be planted at the time in order to help them live, because we just didn't know if it was going to be allowed in the end. And there are a couple of other plants, excuse me, that have died out in other areas. Once we get the landscapers back in, now that we know what will be approved, all those will be addressed, and we'll really get the site up to snuff.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And hopefully, the garbage and personal care products that are strewn on the other side of the wall will be taken care of as well. Thank you. Anybody else want to testify at public comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment section of the public hearing. Return it back to the applicant's representative, Mr. Johnson. You're up. Thank you. You're not required to respond to public comment, as you well know, being someone who's been around a long time, but if you would care to, that would be appreciated.
Well, I think Bruce probably said it best. What you're looking at is a project that's not complete. It's not certified. And until he can get all of his needs as to what needs to be done to get his final certifications, he can't get his final certifications, and part of that is this process. And this process has kind of gone on pretty long. We had no idea we were going to have to come back here as a part of doing this process. Otherwise, this would have been done a long time ago. And I don't even think he had a process for PDPs up until, I think we had to wait until that was enacted. So it kind of took a lot more time than it really should have. But now that we've got some closure, hopefully here, I think those items are going to be addressed. What the owner does with it afterwards, well, I think when he's got an operational system, I think it's a lot more easy to maintain. And when I say about final completion, dead trees, well, there's no reason to replace them now. He might as well just wait until the very end, and whatever's dead, when he needs to get this thing turned over, we get everything up to speed. Plants, trees, whatever. Irrigation system, the entire works. So I can understand his dilemma about where he is right now. But suffice it to say, we can't give a certification on this project until all those items are done.
And I'm sure you can understand the frustration of the residential owners as well. Could you address the point I brought up with Mr. Struve regarding sod versus some other type of plantings?
Well, I think the sod was I don't remember whose idea it was, but I thought it was a good idea because one of the things that I always notice about these areas that are kind of relatively steep slopes, you put the mulch down. Where's the mulch go? It goes downhill, of course. And right up against the riprap, well, the riprap just naturally is going to accumulate that stuff because there's a lot of voids in there. So I thought, well, the sod strip is probably a good thing to act as a little bit of a catchment area. Now, we did put some edging along that edge up against the riprap. That with the sod, the combination of the two, I think would help with the washing out of the mulch to the extent you possibly can. I mean, anything you can do to improve the situation is always a good plan.
Understood. Do you have a thought about the Fakahatchee grass versus muley or zebra or lemon or whatever else?
Do I have a preference? No.
Oh, you're here for the applicant, Mr. Johnston.
I mean, I think in the end, we may put a combination of those in there because we still have to go back for the SDP and do a detailed plan. At the moment here, I mean, basically what you're seeing on the landscape plan we presented is probably what we're gonna run with that for the landscape plan. But we didn't give a whole lot of deep thought to those plants, the grasses that is. It's just essentially, we need the concept approved so we can go out and implement something. I'm sure staff will have something to do with that when we go through the SDP process and plan approval.
I understand. And the reason I bring it up is that my understanding, once again, I'm no expert on landscaping or grass, but is that the Fakahatchee has much deeper roots than the muley or some of the other grasses. But once again, I'm no expert. But you're right, it'll get sorted out at site plan.
Actually, I think I proposed that at one time, and then I saw what was. We'll
You'll figure it
We'll
out.
figure out something that probably works the best in that particular situation there. Suffice it to say, there will be a combination of some kind of grasses instead of the shrubs, which is a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. And if I may have your indulgence on something, a lot of times when I have someone who is a very well qualified expert, even though you didn't request that today, I like to educate myself on things related to the projects. I'd asked you before about the runoff from the pavement, and you said there's a catch basin. I understand that. But my question is, over time, do you think that those parking areas deteriorate and the slope might be modified so that it actually would run towards the water, or is that not possible? just theoretically.
Running towards the water?
Run towards the canal.
Yeah, that's not a good idea.
Well, I know it's not a good idea, but do you think it's possible that occurs?
Oh, that it would occur?
Yeah.
No, because we put curb up there, and we've got a design storm that we run, it's called really the 25-year storm. So whatever that elevation is, we build everything up as far as the curbing to contain it on site. You cannot discharge anything less than or greater than depending on which way you want to look at it. Like if it's a 10-year storm, it's got to be contained. If it's 25, it's contained. If it's 100-year, well, it goes everywhere, like 100-year will.
Like we recently found
So
out,
no, everything inside there will be contained for that 25-year storm event.
because of the curbing.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's an interesting point. I appreciate you educating me on that. I have no other questions unless you have other testimony.
I do not.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Struve, anything else, sir?
I don't have anything really in addition to add. I guess I did have one thing to add. Mr. Johnson had stated it took a little while to get here to hearing, and the owner was in a situation where they did have to wait for us to amend our regulations to allow for a PDP amendment. So I think had things worked out differently, they would have been here a little bit sooner rather than later. But beyond that, I'd just like to request that my staff report be incorporated into my presentation this morning. I'd also like to request that the record reflect that the applicant has no objection to the conditions recommended by staff for this case.
All right, thank you very much. Duly noted. I will recommend that the request go forward with the conditions of approval, and also based upon your representation, the applicant has no problem with the conditions of approval. I am going to modify that subparagraph D to make sure it's clear that the sod is also to be irrigated. The reason for that is that the grass is referenced back to subparagraph C, which only talks about the ornamentals. So I'm sure it's implied, but you know, when you have these type of conditions, I want it to be clear. So with those comments, I will recommend it go forward as requested. I will attempt to get my recommendation out as quickly as possible, recognizing that this has been in the works for a while, and time is money, as we all know. So I will do my very best to get it out within the next couple of days, and then it'll go forward to the council whenever it's possible for the council to schedule. So with those comments, I'm closing the hearing at this time, and the date and time of our next hearing, I seem to have, oh, here it is. The date and time of the next hearing is Tuesday, March 7th, 2023, 9 a.m. here in council chambers. We stand adjourned at 10:03. Thank you.